Hello, do not harmers. This is Roman with Holistic Dog Training, and I'm mentoring. Jesus, good morning. I'm hosting the Do Not Harm show, and today our special guest is Pine Irwin, who is an aggression and resource guarding expert, who was one of the experts recently featured in Michael Shikashio's, if I said right, the Bitey End of the Dog show. Pine is also a fear-free certified professional that works with the Humane Society of the United States to help heal traumatized dogs and around the world. Pine specializes in high-drive, high-intensity dogs, feral dogs, and is our outdoor adventure trail expert. Yep, get you guys' shoes ready. She loves complicated, tough cases and also works with feral and aggressive horses as well as deaf and blind dogs. Join us for our show today, our hot show, and we definitely want to ask Pine anything. And well, here she is, and I need to unmute her because otherwise she cannot talk. Hi, Pine. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm glad to see I'm not the only one with a case of the Mondays. That's really refreshing. It's been a morning.
It's been a morning, right? So my deepest apologies, guys. I'm here in Eugene, Oregon, and I have a little bit of a weather going on, and my internet is really crappy. Where are you guys watching us from? Pine, where do you live?
I live in Meridian, Idaho, which is actually a suburb of Boise, the capital city of Idaho. So
Oh,
I'm
I'm gonna
heading
meet you
around.
on my way to Idaho this weekend.
Oh yeah, where are you going?
I'm going to Idaho to a Great Pyrenees sanctuary. I'm gonna do a workshop there for the weekend.
Oh, the Uganda place?
No, it's called it's Monday. Wait,
Yes.
it's south of Idaho. Yeah, we're gonna talk about it.
Yeah, no, let me know if you're in town. We'll grab a cup of coffee if you've got
I'm
time.
gonna stop by because I will be traveling, so I'm gonna give you a buzz.
Yeah, dude, totally. That'll be so much fun.
Good.
I know
So
all the good
here we
coffee
have
spots.
people from everywhere. Oh, by the way, guys, please give um, StreamYard access to your name so you're not showing up as Mr. Facebook user, right? So accept the invitation that's in the comments, in the description. So click on that. So give StreamYard permission to use your name so we know where you guys are from. So we have Linda. She's in San Diego. We're going to talk about Linda and her new book. I almost said
Mhm.
it. We're going to talk about you today, Pine. So tell me a little bit what's going on with you and when you use wild dogs and what are you doing there?
I am basically one of those people who, when I get asked if I can do something, I answer with, I guess we'll find out. Um, that sometimes goes terribly sideways. Um, but a lot of times it tends to work out okay. I don't know if that's a reflection on my skill or more or less my tenacity, but I love working with difficult cases. So I like working with dogs and any animal that presents a challenge. Oftentimes, that challenge is figuring out a way to get that animal to integrate into our world in a way that works for everyone. It would be all wonderful if we could just tell people, like, it's just being a dog and he's just going to do what dogs do. But that's not really conducive to a modern world. It's definitely not conducive to having a pet because a lot of what dogs want to do is the antithesis of being a pet, of living in somebody's nice suburban home with beautiful floors and all of that. So, and in the case of dealing with feral animals who are being pulled into rescue from situations that are really not awesome, and don't have a good prognosis for survival, like the case of res dogs or feral horses in particular, there's a lot of problems with overpopulation and the available space and things like that. It's about making sure that these animals who otherwise, were kind of more or less fine on their own, um, plus or minus some stuff, can actually be a part of a human society, because whether that's for their benefit or not, we're sort of in charge of the world. Whether that's really the best plan ever or not remains to be seen. But that's just kind of the way it is. And so when you're pulling horses from the BLM and they've got 50,000 horses in holding, that's not an ideal situation for them to just be trapped in pens. And we want to get them into homes and into places where they can be, horses again. Um, and the same goes with dogs. When we're pulling feral dogs from reservations or hoarding situations, I work with a local rescue and we deal with a lot of hoarding cases. Thankfully, of mostly small dogs, which seem to be a little bit easier to place. People are less intimidated. But we're pulling these dogs, 50 chihuahuas from a house where they had lived in the house in the yard and done basically whatever the hell they wanted for their whole lives. It's pretty intense to try to get those animals integrated into a home and get people to, understand that, hey, like this dog is not acting aggressively towards you because he thinks you're, evil inherently. He's acting aggressively towards you because it's the only thing that serves his survival.
So, my question would be, how did you end up doing what you're doing? Are you one of those person who incarnated here, born like already a superhero and doing all this magic stuff you're doing right now? How did you end up doing what you do?
I blame genetics. My grandfather was a veterinarian. My
There you
father
go.
has had animals his whole life, worked with animals. I started riding horses when I was 4. By the time I was 8, I was in training under master level horsemen, more or less to become a professional trainer as a horses. I started my first horse under saddle when I was 13. Um, so I kind of blame genetics. I got started that way. In when the economy crashed, I was training horses full time, and the economy crashed back in
Which one?
'08. The '08, yeah, I know, right?
Oh,
Right. I went to college. I have a college degree in English. Because I never wanted a real job. I was going to be a writer. I was training horses, and then everything just kind of fell apart in the early 2000s. And I went from working on a farm where we were selling horses for $20,000 to being barely able to sell a horse for $2,000 or $3,000,
oh
which
wow.
that's a huge dip. So I took a job at a boarding kennel, just because I was like, man, I got to make some extra money. And I started to see the similarity between working with dogs and working with horses, and it just kind of blew up from there, I guess you could say. I did get my start training professionally as an apprentice under a trainer who trained for personal protection, military, and police application. Um, so
How
I,
did that work out for you there? Like,
uh,
what was the
well,
training approach?
it was compulsive as
No,
hell.
I'm just asking because, like, I'm trying to find similarities here.
Yeah, it was very compulsion heavy. Um, I learned a lot. And at the time, I didn't know any better. And I really wasn't thinking that I was going to make this like a long term thing. I just was really curious about it, really curious. And like much of my life, I just kind of went, I wonder what happens if. And I started working, with these dogs. I adopted a dog from the boarding kennel who had been surrendered for aggression. And the first time I met him, he bit me. And I thought to myself, I bet I can fix him. I had been working with difficult horses my whole life. It wasn't like I was pulling, when I got started, it wasn't like I was using $40,000 horses. I got started training. The first horse I started under saddle was $100. Um, and that was probably overpaying for him. He was very difficult and very dangerous. But I was like, oh, why not? I have $100 in my allowance saved up. I could do it. Um, so it was really compulsion heavy. But the trainer I trained under.
Guys, keep talking. I have kind of like a barking emergency. I need to check it
Oh
out. Hold
yeah,
on a
go
second.
ahead. The trainer I was working under, despite being very compulsion heavy, is to this day someone I admire and respect a great deal in his knowledge of dog behavior and how to use drive and motivation to steer a dog in the correct direction. He taught me a lot, and the aggressive dog I adopted taught me even more. Nothing changes your opinion on corrections faster than a dog who goes, if you do that to me, I'm going to return it just as well. He had absolutely zero problem turning around and just being like, all right, let's go. We'll throw down. And so he taught me a lot. He forced my hand on how to change, on how to approach things differently. Because if I tried to correct him, he corrected right back. And I could see a good dog in there, a dog who wanted to do well, but he was angry. He is to this date one of 3 dogs in my entire career where I was like, yeah, he'd just mess you up because it was Sunday or Monday in this case, I guess. He was pretty aggressive, human aggressive. He was very human aggressive, and until the day he died, I would never describe him elsewise. Um, he wasn't reactive. It wasn't a fear-based response. It was just, he just really enjoyed causing harm to humans, which made him, ironically, a really good protection dog. I trained him through protection. We stopped using any sort of compulsion, because if we did, he just turned around and directed it at us. And I used him for years. I did things like work with the women's and children's shelter. He and I would go out and act as security when people were leaving abusive situations. He stopped. I used to live across the street from a cemetery that had all these huge, massive farm equipment, tractors, cats, and things like that. And someone was trying to steal one day. They were drunk, and it was like the 4th of July or something. And Bodie and I put a stop to that, and Bodie basically kept him on the tractor, wouldn't let him leave the tractor until the police came, and he turned into a great dog. I took him hiking. I went backpacking with him, and I never worried about anything. I used to occasionally pick up hitchhikers, and people would be like, why are you doing that? And I was like, well, I got Bodie in the back seat. Like, what are they going to do? Any problem, I say the word and it was game over. He turned into an incredible dog, but he was, until the day he passed, a dog that I never quite, you can never let your guard down with him. I always had to have one eye on him, which, was fine. I was able to do that. I'm not sure he would have had such a good situation otherwise if he was with somebody who didn't. So I see there's a lot of questions coming in. Oh my gosh, look at all of you guys. Hi. Oh, is Janine on mute?
No, for some reason. I don't know what's going on. Those technical difficulties.
Oh, there's another Boise user. Hi.
So we have Pine. How have your methods changed over the years? And did you ask your granddad lots of animal questions when you were younger?
So, my grandfather actually passed before I was born. I never met the guy. It's funny. I've got a bunch of stuff. My father is very ill at the moment, so he's doing that thing where he's getting rid of like all the family heirlooms and sending them off to the kids. And I've got all these photos of my grandfather in World War II with street dogs, because he was stationed in the Philippines for a long time. In the South Pacific. So there's like pictures after picture of picture. And my grandfather, like, despite the fact that I'm very short, my grandfather was like 6'5". Here's this giant bear of a man with like itty bitty tiny street dog puppies. And I was just looking at it, and that's like all the pictures that are available of him during that time. And I was like, oh, so it's genetic. Just like it's been handed down. I wanted to be a veterinarian most of my childhood. I was very obsessed with it. I put up signs in the kids' room, it put up a sign on the door that said Dr. Irwin's veterinary clinic, and I operated on my stuffed animals. I hit high school, realized I was terrible at chemistry. I'm actually dyslexic, so things with numbers and letters became very difficult for me, and I conflated them, and I struggled a lot. So I kind of had to sort of step back from that. And at the time, I had no idea that ethology was a thing that I could do. So my methods have changed a lot over the years. I'm obviously a force-free trainer at this point. I'm a behavior specialist.
Super
I work
live today.
with a lot of stuff.
What is it?
A lot of aggression in multiple species.
No, he left. I just said home.
I feel like over the years, it was about
Did you tell me anything?
8-9 years ago that I crossed over. And I just decided I was done.
Then call him back.
Doing it a different way. Star Wars was a huge influence on that. I realized that punishment-based training techniques, and if you were using punishment, positive punishment in your training is based in positive punishment, because the only answer the dog is allowed to give you is yes. If they give you any other answer, then yes, sir, you punish them for it. whether it's a leash correction, whether it's an e-collar correction, which I never ever used personally and never liked because I felt like it removed too much of me from the scenario and made it way too easy to punish harder and harder and harder without even knowing you were doing it. And it's always that experiment. That's that psych experiment they did with people where they said you were shocking them and they were measuring, but they weren't really shocking the guy, but he was pretending to be harder and harder, and people kept pushing and pushing and pushing. That was always kind of in the back of my mind with that one. But I realized that I was using fear of punishment, fear avoidance of punishment to communicate with an animal who was reportedly my best friend, right? And I thought to myself, well, first of all, that's not how I would want to be treated as someone's friend. And second of all, fear leads to hate, hate leads to anger, anger leads to the dark side. And Star Wars was a big influence on my life and my childhood. And I realized my daddy did not raise a Sith. And I was like, oh. And so it was kind of overnight. I just kind of went, that's it, I'm done. And I just stopped. And then there was a really steep learning curve for me and my dogs, my current dogs. There was a huge learning curve that we had to go through to figure it out, because what people don't realize is that dogs who are raised under compulsion expect that. And when you change the rules and the paradigm, even for their benefit, there is a period of time where there is going to be a big struggle because the dogs don't know what to expect either. And so as you adjust, so like ride it out, it gets better, I promise. Hire someone to come in and help you understand it better so that your communication can get more precise, and that way your dogs avoid frustration and things like that. But it's yeah, that's kind of how I mean, I literally just one day just went, that's it, I'm done. And I started training a different way, and I started reading, and I started going to conferences, and I started really doing the homework that I probably wasn't doing enough of beforehand, which I suspect is true for most compulsion trainers, is that there's a weird dichotomy of that I have noticed, that they don't get a lot of continued education. And that's probably because to do that requires change. Change is hard.
Um, Janine, any questions? Can you? We cannot hear you. What's happening? Oh man.
Technology is wonderful
Yeah.
until it messes up. The
Yeah.
second it inconveniences me, I hate it.
Right.
And I'm
Okay.
ready.
I'm pretending to be Janine now.
Yes.
Let me shift direction, and maybe that works better now. So Janine wants to ask you definitely a question. Um, why did you join the Do Not Harm group?
Um, I joined on the recommendation of a friend, actually. Coley, she kept saying, you should join it. You should join it. You should join it. And she's a member, and she's been a long-standing member of the group. And I was, I'm a member of so many Facebook groups. And I was like, I don't know, maybe. She kept sharing my stuff to the group, my memes and my graphics and things like that. And I was like, fine, I'll join. And I did. Um, and I'm glad I did. I'm really glad I did, because it became such an interesting place to be, to see so many people so committed to an ethology and an ethos, so to speak, of dogs and other animals too, which I was surprised. I was caught off guard that not just cats, but they were like horses, and they were talking about birds and other animals as well. And to see that many people committed to the benefit of animals was not only really heartening, it was really something I found, I really enjoyed, and I really got a lot out of, um, from like an emotional filling of my cup, as well as educational, because there's always stuff to learn. But it was an emotional filling of my cup working in rescue, and anybody who works in rescue knows it can be emotionally draining. Um,
So I know many people have questions about
yeah, go for
feral
it.
dogs and about rescue dogs and about pet dogs. I don't want it to come from my mouth. I would like you to share a little bit. What is the standard on this earth of a dog? Are mainly dogs pets? This is how they were born? How
Not
many dogs do we
so.
have in general?
There are millions more dogs who are not pets than are. which is a weird way to say it because I can't remember I should know the exact numbers, but I
700 million dogs are
yeah,
free roaming dogs,
exactly.
like
Um,
free roaming horses, but not really.
it's so cool. I just my husband has point blank told me that I'm not allowed to go to any place in which free roaming dogs roam freely unsupervised. I require an adult, otherwise I'm coming home with a new pet. Um, I have a problem. Um, but it's bizarre when we really think of those numbers. When we think of how many more dogs, like 3 to 4 times more dogs are free roaming or feral than are actually living in domesticated environments. It's bizarre when we consider that in contrast to the fact that dogs are the direct result of human meddling, so to speak. Um, we like the evolution of dogs is just totally fascinating. And if you guys haven't read the books by Raymond Coppinger, Dr. Coppinger, highly recommend, highly recommend. His books are fantastic. He was a remarkable individual in terms of ethology and changing the way I perceive dogs, as well as where the way academics perceive dogs. So I think free roaming dogs are fascinating. Feral dogs are even cooler. And we see them and we think of them as being things that happen in other places. I'm from the United States, so I tend to, unfortunately, through conditioning, view the world through a US centric mindset, despite the fact that
Good
my mother was
point.
actually British. I try not to. My mother was British. I try to keep a more global perspective, but I'm a product of my environment. Sorry. So we tend to think of that as a thing that happens elsewhere. We think of Indian street dogs. We think of the street dogs in Central America. We think of, the feral dogs roaming in Egypt, which Emma was discussing about last week. But
In Greece.
we don't realize it happens here too. Maryland actually Baltimore has a pretty significant street dog, feral dog population, to the point that there have been studies written about it, that are fascinating books to read if you're an academic. If you're not an academic, they're terribly boring, and I'm really sorry. Coppinger is the exception. Coppinger is not academic. Read him. Where I swear it will be worth your while. But I read like all the little manuals and studies written by PhDs about how we can deal with feral dog populations in Baltimore and things like that for fun, because I'm a nerd. If the Star Wars stuff didn't give it away,
I have another
and
nerd.
yes. um, and then we also have significant street dog, feral dogs, and free roaming dog populations in on reservations, on First Peoples reservations, and they are often sources of conflict between the dogs and what the dogs are doing and what the humans are doing. There are cases of violence, aggression, dogs attacking, and then that usually leads to some pretty horrific outcomes for a lot of the dogs. So we have a very significant free roaming street dog slash feral dog, and there's minor differences between those. But dogs who don't really have, a home, a comfy bed to go home to. There's a significant amount of them in the United States, and we tend to view this as a problem of other places and not the fact that it is actually right here in our own backyard. Um, Even in my own area, my own valley, I actually have a client who got a dog. It was a free roaming street dog. Picked him up, and he was about 7, 8 months old. He'd been living in an alleyway behind a Chinese restaurant stealing food, and they finally got tired of him because he got big enough and was behaving aggressively enough that she, bless her heart, took him in, and he's been a challenge for her. Um, he's very reactive. He's very, cautious of strangers and difficult to interact with, and she, veterinary care has been a real problem as well. But she's very committed to him. So I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm in. Like,
So,
cool, we'll
see who
fix
I
him.
got here today. We got a special visitor coming checking in
Hi,
on
yeah,
us.
I
yeah,
my mic works. Is my mic working?
Yes,
yes.
it is.
Oh, okay. I just thought I'd pop in because um Janine, there seems to be some technical problem with your mic. So anyway, Pine. Oh my God, we're just so thrilled to have you. And I've been listening, and you're like so interesting. And I wanted to know, I know you've been talking some about this, but I believe you work with the Humane Society of the United States. Is that
Yes.
wow? Can you tell us about how you got started doing that? And I know you've been talking intermittently about probably some of your work with them, but just give us a little bit of background and how what your involvement is, because that's I mean I get emails from them almost every day about the amazing work that they're doing around the world. I know there's some controversy, but there's controversy in animal welfare,
Yeah.
on every page. So, but wow, like tell us about it.
Dumb luck. No, no, it was actually the director of the rescue that I work with here locally. Happened to know the gal who is the regional director for HSUS for the western half of the United States. She happens to live here. She actually happens to live like half a mile from me, weirdly. Um, and they knew each other. And um, the director of the rescue and her were talking about this case that the HSUS had been contacted about, and it was a dog who had a bite history. He was deaf. He was a deaf Catahoula mix, and he had a pretty significant bite history. It wasn't just he nipped a couple of people. He actually did some serious damage to a young kid, and they were trying to evaluate his likelihood for placement. They were just like, we just want to know. And so, they were talking and my name came up. And so Melissa, the director of the rescue that I work with, was just like, gave my name, and they contacted me and they said, can you do this evaluation? Can you see what this dog is like? I did the evaluation and the prognosis was not awesome. um, I worked with him. He was very smart and he was very willing, but he had been handled in a very compulsive manner. And because he was deaf, communication with deaf dogs has to be really, really conscious, because they are using a lot more body language cues and things like that from humans to understand us. And so we can't, act like we're going to do one thing and then say another and rely on that cue, that verbal cue to indicate what's going to happen. They become hyper aware of the antecedents. And the big problem is this dog was very under socialized, and he would get very aggressive when you try to put him in a crate. Well, he'd been crated a lot and he'd been removed from situations really forcefully where they would just drag him out. And so, of course, he had a pretty big problem. I suspect he also had some neck problems from being drug around, even though he wasn't a small dog. Cute little tiny Chihuahuas get away with biting people. 80-pound Catahoula mixes do not. um, and so I did the evaluation and I sent my prognosis. And basically, my prognosis was, if you cannot find a private rescue to take this dog, he's not going to make it out of a shelter. And that euthanization would be at that point probably a kindness, rather than spending the rest of his life waiting in a cage. I told the director of my rescue, we do not have the time and the resources to fix this dog. Like I could work with him privately, but like, you guys cannot afford for that financially. And I don't have the time to just donate that kind of level of work and time. And so that's usually most of my job with the rescue, honestly, is being like, no, we do not have the time for that, the resources for that. We could devote, and I would love to say that we could devote, hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars to a single case. And the reality of that is we can't. There's too many more that need help and that have better prognosis for us to spend all this. And so the director of the rescue took him in and ended up sending him to a different rescue. I don't like them. The guy who runs it, their trainer, quote unquote, is a Cesar Millan wannabe. It's not a good situation. And the last I knew, he had to be behaviorally euthanized because, of course, he escalated. But that's how I got involved with HSUS. And then they would just reach out to me periodically on case by case basis to evaluate dogs. Particularly, their focus is less individual dogs and more large population situations like hoarding, which I know HSUS is controversial and all this other stuff, but that is their primary focus, is a generalized overall approach. They're less concerned. So it's rare for them to have like an individual dog case. It's often hoarding. It's often serious neglect. We're talking somebody's got 12 dogs in kennel runs and you can count their ribs kind of situations. And I will be called in to evaluate dogs and determine, hey, this one probably, that one probably not. And as you know, Roman, working with dogs who have experienced trauma, that there's a line like where, we want to help, but you realize, you look at the workload and you look at the damage that's been done and you realize that it's too much for individuals to take on and too much risk. Whether we like it or not, dogs can be quite dangerous. And if they are behaving aggressively, if they are using aggression as a means to manage their own feeling and trauma and their own fear, larger dogs can be really dangerous.
Yeah.
I guess small dogs can be dangerous too, because I'm sure we've all seen that recent news story about the 18-month-old kid and the puppies. So get enough of them, like little compies from Jurassic Park. But yeah, so that's what I do with HSUS is, and pre-pandemic, we were planning to implement a program for local reservations here in Idaho. And we were working with tribal police trying to implement programs that would help mitigate the conflict between the res dogs and the populations, as well as encourage people who were allowing their dogs to be free roaming dogs to like do a little bit better management in terms of vaccinations and spaying and neutering, which is it's kind of a chicken and the egg situation out there. But the pandemic hit and a lot of the reservations were hit really hard by the pandemic. And the program was, tabled. We haven't looked into restarting it, I suspect because of funding. So, which is a bummer because I was really excited about it.
So you also work with high intensity dogs, and also with like working on trails.
Yeah.
Where do you see people struggling with taking the dogs out for hikes?
I think the biggest problem people have is they expect way more of their dog than they expect of themselves. They want to just take their dog out on the trail and turn them loose and expect that everything is going to go well, that every dog they
Well,
meet is going to be, yeah.
don't dogs deserve freedom? Why
Yeah, they
don't just
do.
take the leash off and let them do
Um,
things?
because wildlife is really problematic. Really problematic. I live in an area where grizzly bears, wolves, deer, elk, moose, rattlesnakes, coyotes, foxes, raccoons, you name it, all exist here. And most of those things are very dangerous for dogs to encounter directly, either because of disease or risk of injury to them or the wildlife. Wildlife is really a problem. If you turn your dog loose on the trail and you expect to just be able to call them back, that's a tough ask, because as I tell my clients, I have dogs who have obedience titles out the wazoo. My big lab is probably one of the most well-trained dogs you will ever meet in your life. He's got 4 obedience titles, 3 or 4 certifications, including lifeguard and search and rescue. I still carry treats on the trail with him, even though he's an old man now and usually lags behind at this point. But because I will never, under any circumstances, be cooler than a skunk. I'm not that interesting. I have to cheat the system and rely on a reinforcement history that is sky high to compete with things like that. And then when we're talking about encountering wildlife that is dangerous, like grizzly bears and black bears, not something your dog needs to encounter. And coyotes can do some serious harm, even to a
Especially
large
if they're
dog.
in groups.
Yeah, especially if they're in groups.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're in groups and they're clever and they will trap dogs. They will lure dogs out and be like, come here, come on, we just want to talk. You don't want to talk. You want to eat the dog. And so it's really a problem. And a lot of people that they get this idea that, well, my dog's going to be off leash and they're going to have this great and amazing off leash experience. And it ends up being a really awful thing, because next thing you know, they're at the emergency vet clinic because their dog got bit by a rattlesnake. Or
Some people go to the
ahead.
conclusion that, I want to give my dog freedom, and because I want my dog always to come back, they resort to using aversive tools like shock collars.
Yeah.
How does that work for them?
Not awesome. as most of us in this particular organization and group are going to know about the fallout. But what you see is oftentimes, I see it all the time, dogs who approach my dogs and they're wearing a shock collar and they're doing this number, you know, because they're getting shocked, but they're not turning around, because the idea of meeting my dogs is so powerful and so exciting, or so overwhelming in terms of their stimulus control, that even getting electrocuted isn't enough. And a lot of people also just slap a shock collar on him and expect that the dog's going to know what that means. It doesn't. I tell people, if you want your dog to have an off-leash experience, that is an earned thing, and it's earned from us. We earn it. You know, our dogs need to be reliable in the recall, and I don't expect any dog to be 100% reliable on anything. I am not 100% reliable on anything. In fact, I'm terribly unreliable. I have ADHD. Do with that what you will. I cannot be. Consistency is a terrible thing for me as a person, but if we want 100% reliability, use a long line, use a leash. That guarantees it, right? You've got it tied to you. I will wrap it through my wrists. I'll hook it through my arm. I'll clip it to my belt, whatever it takes. That is 100% reliable. That's as close to 100% reliable as you can possibly get on the trail. And a dog who's got a 30-foot long line is still getting an off-leash experience. They're just not being given more freedom than they can handle. It's like small children. You know, we don't set out with our kids and be like, okay, you can go to the park when you're 2 years old, all by your onesies, unsupervised. No, we go with them.
Exactly.
You know, we extend the rope
I'm so
as they
glad
can
you
handle it.
brought that up about the dangers of off leash outdoors, because that's something that's not talked about very much. You know, in my book, I have a section. You know, there's an item on the hierarchy of dog needs about indoor shelter, and so also, I mean, I looked into this. I mean, insects, bees, the kinds of trouble in addition to wildlife that your dog can get into when running loose, you know, shock collar or no shock collar, heaven forbid, but it's something that, you know, people just don't normally think about. So I'm glad you brought that up, and we want to talk about that more, because typically we talk about, you know, what happens when that dog runs up to another dog
Mm-hmm.
that is reactive, that is dog aggressive. And, you know, we see that side a lot in the group. But let me say, Pine, I am thrilled that you love hard cases, you know, because
The weirder, the better.
you know, when you told me that, I said, oh, you know, this one, yeah, we want her. You know, we see a lot of the same questions asked in the group over and over again, and that's fine, because you know we're reaching. I mean, in the last 60 days, we've reached more than 1 million viewers in the group, and it's mind-boggling, you know, how much good we've been able to do being an open public group where everyone can see us. But when I get that unique question, you know, it's like, oh, something, you know, something new. And it's really good to be able to refer over to you. I feel confident that, you know, even with my private clients that I'm unable to take, that I can refer to you and that you're going to be able to handle it. So bravo.
So thank you. Yeah, the weirder the case, the better. The weirder the question, the better. I love puzzles. I really do. When I got the call about the aggressive duck, you know, and the director of the rescue was like, can you can you behavior modification a duck? And I was like, let's find out. At 6 o'clock in the morning, I was like, I don't know. We'll find out. And I did. It worked. We got him sorted out so that he was no longer a danger. A duck. Yeah, he was aggressively in love with someone. Not a duck species, a human. And it was mating season, and he was very, very violent. And he's a Muscovy duck, and they have like a little point on their beak, and he would dig in to the back of her leg, and he was doing damage through her clothing. And so it was kind of one of those situations where it was like, we need something done. And I was like, cool, let's figure out if we can figure it out. And we did. We sorted it out, and we got him, and he ended up he was adopted out, because at that point they were like, we're never going to be able to adopt this guy if he, like, you know, every spring decides to get all violent with his feelings. Yeah, so I love weird cases, but yes, the environment can be as much of a problem as other dogs on the trail or other trail users. You know, and where I live, we've got horses on the trails too, and dogs plus horses, it can go very, very badly, and people can get very seriously hurt, and dogs can get killed. My horse is a feral Mustang, formerly feral Mustang, and they are notorious for not being super enamored of dogs. He likes his dog. He tolerates his dogs. He's comfortable with his dogs. Strange dogs come up to him and he will handle it, and not in a way that's going to end well for a dog or me if I get caught unawares. Um, but there's also things like a few years ago, there were like 4 different cases in the span of like 6 weeks at the emergency vet clinic of dogs who jumped into hot springs seeking water. And we have them everywhere here. We are just like, throw a rock. I have people ask me who moved to the area, oh, where can we find hot springs? I'm like, throw a rock. They're all over. And particularly in certain regions, they're prevalent. I hike in those areas. My dogs hike on a short lead. They're on a 6-foot line. And every water crossing we come to that I do not know, I stop them, I make them wait, and I test it with my hand first. Because the hot springs come out of the ground at such a temperature, it literally will kill an animal. It boils them. There's things like that. I
Ouch.
hike in areas. Yeah, it's terrible. And I
Hot
own
dog.
Labradors. Yeah, I own labs. So they will jump into any body of water. They do not care. And so, that's something that people don't even think about. An e-collar is not going to protect your dog from that. Your dog 40 feet ahead of you might be able to recall on your e-collar, but you don't know that they're
That he needs your
jumping
help.
into a hot spring and burning themselves, from the outside into the inside, because the second they ingest that water too. I mean, I also hike in areas and I'm backpack through areas where we're walking along a cliff edge, and a fall is going to be problematic for everyone's health and safety. And I have young dogs who are rowdy and energy. I like dogs who are kind of extra about those things. So when we're in areas like that, on a leash they go. Because I don't want to have to deal with that scenario. I knew someone who did, whose little Jack Russell Terrier fell down a 20-foot cliff and miraculously survived with like some cracked ribs and bruising. I attribute that to the fact that Jack Russell Terriers are semi-indestructible, but it was just one of those situations where this dog slipped, zigged when they should have zagged, and it's a terrible situation. A harness and a leash would have, caught that dog and been able to pull them back up.
Next question. What is your hardest, most difficult, interesting behavior case you have worked in? Except the duck. No ducks.
The ducks really is a top one. A lot of my cases with the horses, with working with the feral horses, the Mustangs, are really fascinating. In terms of, we're talking about an animal who's got 500 years of selective evolution that states, the best solution to any problem is to kick it and run away. And so those are always really fascinating. Another case I worked on was a deaf bulldog who had CH, which is cerebral hypoplasia. And it's a brain damage problem that's caused during birth. He was taken in by the rescue because the director of our rescue is one of the sweetest, kindest, softest people I've ever met. And she has never seen a hard luck case that she's just not like, especially medically. She's worked in the veterinary medical field for forever. And so when she sees a medical case, she's like, we can do it. He was fascinating because we were dealing with a dog who's not only deaf, but also had pretty significant neurological issues to consider. He walked really funny. He shook all the time. His head was tilted. He was amazing to work with. His owners adopted him, and every dog that gets adopted through our rescue gets an hour-long consult with me at no extra charge. It's built in to the adoption fee. I charge the rescue like minimal, just enough basically to cover my gas. And we do that because we're trying to make sure that these dogs stay in their home, right? We want them to stay there. And so if anybody has problems or questions, they get an hour with me to suss it out. But now these guys hired me additionally after that, 12 weeks. And for 12 weeks, we worked together. And it was fascinating to watch this dog grow and change. And ways that, because they had another dog who was very, very well trained. He was a good dog. He was a bulldog mix of some kind. So they were very similar in temperament. And they were like, well, it worked with Frank, and why isn't it working with Sully? And I was like, well, he's deaf and he's neurological, so having to adjust expectations for both myself and the owners, but still end up in a place where everyone could be happy and coexist was so much fun. which I think is probably a weird way to approach that. But I view it as fun. I'm like, oh wow, so this is gonna be really hard. We can't just go in there and be like, let's teach him sit. It's like how do we deal with a dog who has a neurological condition that makes bladder control hard and difficult? Not only is he a young puppy at the time, he has a neurological condition that makes his bladder basically go from like, I have to pee to I am peeing in a very short window. Like, how do we teach this dog to do that? How do we teach him to notify people that he's got to go to the bathroom? And he can't hear the poop bells, right? The little pooch bells, because that's what they were using with their other dog. And he'd just go bang the bells, and he had learned the banging of the bell sound opens the door, etc. And I was like, well, he can't hear the bell, so how do we teach him? What we ended up teaching him is buttons, to push a button that would ring like a doorbell sound throughout the entire house. Because the human dad worked from home, and he had an office. He was, I don't know, he does something in medicine where he makes and he would be in his office, on phone calls and stuff, and he couldn't, he wouldn't know that the dogs had to go out. And so we set up that system, and it was originally like a little tiny button. And I was just like, what if we made it bigger? And so we took a piece of cardboard and we made it bigger, and we made it like bright blue. And we taught him that if he pushes this button, it will open the door. And he couldn't hear it. There was no cue to him that he'd been successful. But we got to the point where he would just basically run at it and just like punch it with his nose, and he would get so excited to go out. And that was how we adjusted it, because he couldn't hit the smaller button. He would miss it sometimes. Because his neurological condition made it hard for him to aim. So he was, oh man, he was fun. He was really fun to work on, and to just kind of like, how do we tweak this? It's, most people who work with dogs and work in a professional capacity with animals, the dirty secret is that mostly we're just throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Well, one thing that I've found fascinating over the years is that, working in this field is just so, never endingly creative, that using your imagination on a tough case, once you have that solid foundation and you're trying to figure out, okay, like what you did with that dog, that was that light bulb moment. And that's what's so great about what we're teaching in the group, is that people learn once, they understand a problem, understanding the problem first, reading the body language, really trying to learn what the dog's needs are in terms of basic needs, and also in terms of behavior modification to fit into the home, the very loving home that is. They can go on and then start figuring stuff out themselves, which feels like, oh my God, there's like a new problem, and I have these ideas about what I might do to solve it. And it's, it just goes on, and the more you learn, the more you can do. And it's just like this beautiful progression. So, well, thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah. No, once you understand what behavior can mean in dogs, because behavior is just behavior, right? The dog is behaving in a certain way because they view that behavior in that moment is necessary or will yield the result that they're hoping for. Once you understand that, the rest of it is just throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. See what changes it.
I feel one magic thing working with animals from a behavior perspective is that they're so unique. We have a unique animal in a unique environment that has a unique mindset. And our goal is to find out what motivates that dog. What comes up in his mind when some trigger comes up? What does he think about it? How does he want to solve the problem? How does he actually do it? And so we have such a variety. So people think that when we do animal behavior work, it's kind of like us asserting onto the dog, so the dog does what we want. But the reality is, what we want is what motivates the dog, what makes him feel good, and then start to encourage him to make more of those good choices that are in alignment with our safety. We want free dogs. We don't want dogs to be confined in a crate all day long, being confined through a crate, through a collar, through a gate. We want them to to explore their freedom so their needs are met in all the capacity possible without our intervention. We want dogs to be independent, not dependent on if we are there or not, because they have to make decisions where like we are not there,
Yeah.
right? And I think that point that you come from working with feral dogs, working with feral horses, understanding what actually their freedom looks like, and see can we recreate that freedom in our pet environment, make them feel as free as possible in this safe, contained environment that we can offer them.
Yeah. Well, I have a blog post about it somewhere on my website, and it's I don't care about obedient dogs. I just
Thank
don't.
you. Thank you.
I don't.
That's
I don't
cute.
care if I ask for a sit and you give it to me immediately, or it takes you 20 seconds to get your butt on the ground. I really don't care. What I care about is creating dogs who are well behaved, dogs who make good choices, who understand that in the context of this environment, the choices that work out best for me and for everyone are X, Y, and Z. And I think there's a big difference in that. People who want obedient dogs maybe consider a robot for starters. Um, Way less maintenance, and definitely don't need vet, expenses, and they don't, don't have to clean up after them. But also, every time you tell the robot to sit, it's going to sit, right? Whereas I just care that my dogs make good choices, and I'm not even really that particular, like out in the environment, what those good choices are, as long as they are safe and reasonable. My dogs get a lot of freedom on the trail because I work very hard to make that a part of their existence. But I always tell people within reason, I'm going to allow you to have this 30 feet space even once the leash is removed, and that's kind of like the no mess with zone within reason. And if I see you trying to eat something weird and suspicious, I'm going to intervene.
Right.
Mostly because I don't want to clean that up at 3 a.m. when you give it back to me,
But
or ingest something terribly.
I like that
Yeah,
you
go ahead.
you base your approach with morals and ethics. There is a
Yeah,
reason why you do that, and the dog understands the reason because you just make sense.
yeah.
And I
If
like also the approach of conformity and compliance versus obedience, because the dog should have a free choice whether or not he's capable of doing what you ask him to do, if it's appropriate in the situation. Otherwise, you would not have those communication skills. If a dog doesn't sit when you tell him, he has a reason for that. And if you don't understand the reason, obedience will only create a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, because I've created it was Dr. Amy Cook said, she's a PhD, she works with dogs, she's phenomenal, wonderful, amazing trainer and behavior specialist. She said a yes from an animal means very little from an animal that can't say no. So
Mhm.
compliance means very little to me in terms of like, I'm not impressed. Okay, I'm just not impressed when you've got a shock collar on your dog and you're like, recall, and he comes, like, see, he came. Like, okay, but he had no other choice in that environment. Like, there was no option there. So why should I be impressed with that? Like, it's all well and good that, I pay my taxes and obey the speed limit, but I don't do those things out of the goodness of my heart, right? The requirements of living in a society, a modern society. So I do them because that is part of the condition of being in a modern society. It's not like I just willingly want to fork over or not drive 80 miles an hour down this perfectly straight stretch of road, because I like to go fast. And I find that very rewarding personally. Like, how fast can we go? I do it with my horse too. He likes to go fast too. We're kind of demons on the trail. In group rides, everybody's like, you be in front. I'm like, that's fair. Like, because otherwise Ben and I are just like, why are you guys so slow? We like to go fast. So, it's not, yes means very little to me when the option to say no doesn't exist. If I ask my dog for a behavior and they don't give it, there's probably a fair reason for that. Maybe they don't understand it.
Mm.
Perhaps in the context of this environment, they're like, wait, what does sit mean? I don't get it. We're not sitting in our training room. We're not in our backyard. This is a totally new place. And by the way, did you know that a squirrel died over here 6 weeks ago? It smells amazing. Maybe they don't, maybe they can't. Maybe there's a competing reinforcer like this dead squirrel, or there's a dog 6 feet up ahead who I really got to go check that guy out. Or perhaps it's not comfortable, it's not safe. Maybe you're asking them to sit on ground that is hot, cold, hard, and they've got bad hips. Maybe you're asking them to sit on top of a goat head, which, if you're not from this area, they make stepping on a Lego look like a fun, pleasant experience. They're absolutely god awful little things. They're like demons. think about stepping on a thumbtack. That's what it's like. So maybe you've asked your dog to sit in a patch of goat heads and you didn't realize it. Maybe, maybe they have a goat head stuck in their foot. Maybe it's really hot and putting your butt on the hot ground is uncomfortable. Maybe it's really cold and putting your butt on the cold ground is really uncomfortable. Maybe their hips are bothering them. Maybe their knee is bothering them, whatever it is. And so if the answer is always why can't they instead of why won't they, you'll probably come to a place of much more kindness and compassion, much more ethical approach to training, instead of just being like, well, why won't they? Well, they won't because somehow it's personal not to sit right now in this environment. The dog is doing it because they're trying to give me the middle finger and they're challenging me. Very rarely. Very rarely. I mean, I'm not going to say that it never happens, that no dog in the history of ever has gone and looked at somebody and been like, screw you. But it's rare and it's not a good way to approach training.
We have 1 minute left. And before we close, I would like Linda to tell us a little bit closing about who are we meeting next time?
Well, I just want to thank you, Pine, so much. And Janine, did your mic go on?
I don't think so.
Oh, you're good.
Oh.
So we're gonna have to have a takeaway from Janine on this. So Janine, why don't you go ahead first and absorb all that and like wrap it up before I talk about the new book.
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Pine, for joining us and for giving us your background and where you're coming from. I think it's a wonderful perspective, and it's really wonderful to hear the variety of across our moderators, what the history has been and how we learn and how we come to new conclusions and how we're open to learning. I think it's just fascinating to hear, and it gives me a better perspective for going forward. And I look forward to hearing more from you in the future. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks, Janine. So the day before yesterday, guess what came in the mail for me? The book. I can hold the book in my hands, and I'm just thrilled. I have a video of me opening the box that I will post it sometime soon. But here it is, and I'm just absolutely thrilled. This is like many years in the making, and I can just show you a little bit if I may. Here's the dedication. It's dedicated to force-free trainers, and Nikki Tudge said that the dedication, wraps it up about the whole book, and it made me cry to write it. The table of contents is very detailed because my goal is to make things easy to find. So I wanted to provide for readers easy access, as well as there is a very detailed index, 23 pages of index. So, whatever you're looking for, that's included in the book, which is a lot. By the way, I was just marking the other experts here that I have cited in the book, so I can let them know, hey, you're in the book, and we're going to be posting excerpts from those experts as well, because I stand on the shoulders of other greats, obviously. And there's a journey on me and the hierarchy of dog needs. Endorsements from Dr. Mark Bekoff, who wrote the foreword. Oh my gosh. And also Lisa Tenzin-Dolma, the founder of ISCP. And anyway, the book is just, I have to go through it page by page, but I'm pretty happy. This is the book I've been wanting to publish for 7 years in the making, and it's going to be available on Amazon for pre-order on July 6th. So on July 11th, I will be here to speak to you all in depth about the book and to answer any questions that you may have. Thanks, Roman, for hosting our moderators. it's been wonderful to get to know everyone, for me as well as for our Do No Harm members. And this show with Pine and all of our other Meet the Moderator shows are available for you. If you couldn't make one of them, they're all in the featured on the page, and you can watch whenever is convenient for you. And I can tell you, because I've been to every one, I'm not in every one, but they're all excellent. So thank you all so much for your kind attention. And Roman, thank you, Roman, for hosting. And Janine, thank you so much for co-hosting.
Awesome. So, and here we are again at the end of the show. Thank you so much. I'm not crying. We had so much fun. But I'm going to take you up on my trip. On my way there, I'm going to definitely stop for a coffee.
Yeah.
We have to talk about stuff.
I mean, I
Honestly,
think
in the very beginning, when you showed up in the moderator group, and I was like, oh, it's one of those people who works with feral dogs. Great. But you know what? You shouldn't judge your book out of a cover, except of Linda's. Linda sent us a book. Even if you see the cover, you know what's going on. And we're definitely going to talk about that. So, yeah, we didn't have time to squeeze you with any questions. You got away with it. But we're going to get back to that. So, next time again, we're going to talk about Linda's book. And stay tuned. Make sure you're subscribed to the group. Make sure it's your favorite group. I know it's very hard to push that button, but you do it. And so when everything comes up, you get notification, or you're going to miss nothing. So thanks again, everyone, for being a good participant and asking your questions in between. And we're going to see you next time, which is when, Linda?
July the 11th, on a Monday.
July 11. Remember, July 11. Like not 11. 10 o'clock Pacific time, exactly, 7-Eleven. It's very easy. Every time you pass a 7-Eleven, you can remember that. And of course, we have a lot of questions here in the past, but I'm sure Pine will come in, check in, and answer any questions you guys have left. So goodbye from me, and congratulations to your book. I'm going to leave you out there for our goodbyes.
Yeah, congratulations, Linda. That's amazing.
And thank you, Janine, for your help. Janine, you're in the acknowledgement section, as is Rebecca Hudson, and a lot of people who have been very important on this journey with the book in my life, and of course in my training career. So thank you.
Thank you, Linda, and thank
you,
Roman.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.
And don't forget, 7-Eleven. See you next time.